Welcome to PADNET Presents. I'm your host, Derek J. Simpson, Executive Director of the Long Beach Community Action Partnership. Our program focuses on introducing guests that will tell you stories that will inspire, engage, and empower you because of the significance of what they do in our community. Today it's special because we have an important subject, especially to those that may be clients or have someone in their family that's a client or a customer of Long Beach Community Action Partnership, because we want to talk about the Rent Escrow Account Program. And we're going to do that with two special professionals and ladies in our community that have a great interest in this, because this is one of their primary areas of focus, and they have great insight on the matter that will be shared with you in hopes that it will help someone in your family, in your community, or that you can pass on the word about just how important this particular issue may be. So I'd like to introduce our two guests. Welcome, ladies. First, Carrie Gallagher, who's with Housing Long Beach. And then we have Jennifer Weissman with Legal Aid Foundation LA.
Of Los Angeles, yes.
But you have an office here in Long Beach.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, so Jennifer, let's stay with you for a moment, because in working here in Long Beach, you mentioned before we started the show that you were up in Los Angeles before coming here. Were you working in the same general area there?
Yes, so I'm a tenant attorney, which means that I represent people who are facing an eviction. And I do that work here in Long Beach, and I previously did the same work in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles has a rent escrow account program, so I'm very familiar with it there.
Now, I'm curious, in that particular area of law, is that something, as you went through your schooling to become an attorney, was that an area that you said, wow, this is something that's important and I want to be someone that specializes, or did you just kind of get, herded in that direction, so to speak?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the key pillars of poverty. If you are homeless, you're more likely to be in poverty than if you have a home. Having a home is related to health care, general well-being, ability to have a job, so absolutely.
Very interesting. So in the world of community action, we need more people, certainly in your profession, to help us as we fight poverty, when you consider that community action agencies nationally are considered the America's Poverty Fighting Network. So that's great to hear. I'll have to make sure that I pass that on to my colleagues around the state and the nation. Now, Carrie, you and I have worked over, several years now in the community, and I met you through the Building Health Community Initiative. And give us a bit of insight about your organization and why it's important in our community.
Yeah, so Housing Long Beach is a community organizing and advocacy agency that works on a number of housing issues. So today we're going to be talking about issues of substandard housing, but we also advocate for the development of quality housing that's affordable. So we really want to make sure that as we continue to build residential units in Long Beach, that we build for everyone, so that all members of our workforce have a safe, healthy home. So we partner with Legal Aid by identifying solutions to the concerns we see in the community. And we work with folks on the ground, organizing low-income residents who are experiencing issues of substandard housing or poverty. And then we partner with Legal Aid and other organizations to really then identify best practices across the state and fight for more comprehensive solutions here in Long Beach.
So speaking of those comprehensive solutions, that sort of brings us then to the topic of this particular program. And because we only have less than half an hour to talk about it, I want to jump right into that. And Carrie, what exactly is the REAP program, as it were, for those who've never heard of that concept?
Yeah, so I think it's good for listeners as well. Rent Escrow Account Program, we lovingly call it REAP. So REAP is a model that's been used in Los Angeles for the last 30 years. It's also used in Oakland, in Sacramento. Many cities across the state use this model, and it's a part of the code enforcement program. So many residents don't actually know that the city does have a code enforcement division that they can call if their landlord is being unresponsive to making repairs. An inspector will come out, identify the problem, and write a violation notice. At that time, ideally, the landlord would make the repair. However, in many cases, that's not happening. In many other cases, the landlord becomes angered by having this violation notice and just puts a 30-day notice to evict, or an eviction notice. and the tenant has to leave the premise. And so as we see these issues that people are being retaliated against, they're not getting healthier homes to live in, we really found that REAP was a great solution. And the way that it works is that if that inspector from the city sends the violation notice and the landlord continues to not make any improvements over a series of months, shows no intention of making the place healthier, the renter will be able to pay a reduced rent, which is totally legal under state law, a reduced rent to the city, and the city holds it in an escrow account or a third-party account, and it's held there until the conditions are fixed, at which time the landlord gets their money back. But that rent reduction is critical because it creates the accountability. Right, each month that the unit is in disrepair, the landlord is losing money. And so it creates a disincentive and real accountability for them to bring the unit back into compliance.
So when we hear that, if I'm a landlord, as you said, some people may or may not call because they're afraid of the retaliation. And I guess, Jennifer, the retaliation is real. It's not something that people are just, concerned about for no reason. What is the current legal landscape that makes the REAP necessary?
So right now, state law does prohibit retaliation. So a landlord's not supposed to increase the rent in retaliation for complaints made and is not supposed to evict a tenant. The problem is that in practice, state law protections are ineffective. A tenant in court has the burden of proving that the landlord had a retaliatory motive. This is incredibly difficult to do, even with an attorney and great evidence. So it's not enough in court to show that the landlord was angered by complaints that a tenant made. It's also not enough to show that complaints were made to code enforcement or to the landlord. Retaliatory motive is just incredibly difficult and practically impossible to prove. The REAP program would create this safe harbor. It would bolster the state law protections so that a tenant, when they go into court, would be able to prove the retaliatory motive because it would be better defined. And the law would clearly delineate what a landlord can and cannot do in response to complaints.
Now, Carrie, when we were talking earlier, you said that it's not like every landlord out there is, just not caring about those people who stay there. There's a small percentage of people that typically fall into this particular area, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the majority of landlords are taking care of their property, taking care of their tenants, and doing their duty of keeping a decent, safe, healthy place for folks, to live. REAP is really going after the slumlords. It's going after the worst of the worst. So in LA, which has a great track record over their 30 years, they've actually brought 30,000 units into compliance through the REAP program. In LA, 1% of the housing stock has ever been in REAP. So we're not looking at a policy that just, targets everyone who may have roaches one day, right? This is really about folks living in serious substandard conditions with absentee landlords who are doing nothing about it. This really goes after the most vulnerable renters and really targets the worst bad actor landlords.
Now, there is a due process for landlords, right, Jennifer?
Yes.
I mean, not giving fair time here. I mean, from a landlord perspective, they can follow up before a legal action is taken.
Yes, so a landlord's given multiple opportunities to make the repairs, and the landlord also has an opportunity to discuss the issue with the city at a code enforcement hearing. And the landlord also has the ability to appeal any decision made by the city to place the property in REAP. So there are many due process protections for a landlord.
Now, once a property is placed into this mode, what's the typical time frame for it to, be deemed necessary for an escrow account to be set up and for the tenant to pay into it with their rent, as I understand, the city to deal with it administratively? Is there a typical time frame in terms of months? Are we talking years? What?
So in Los Angeles, the initial code enforcement will do an initial inspection and then give the landlord 30 days to make any repairs, and then give an extension if necessary. And then they'll come out again and they'll do this up to 3 times. And each time the landlord can request an extension if necessary. So this can go on for many months before a property enters REAP. It really only applies to those slumlords that refuse to make repairs.
Carrie, what's the health impact? I know that in the beginning of 2015, there was a story about people in an apartment being found because they were using a heater of some kind. Now, it's not to say that that apartment didn't have heating, but maybe they didn't. Maybe it wasn't adequate. I would imagine there are other health implications in this too for people who live in substandard housing.
The health implications are very severe, right? So I think that in Long Beach, we often talk about the crisis of asthma. I think we have something like 4 times the national rate, and we often credit that to our very poor air quality from the port and the many, freeways and things like that. Yeah. Well, asthma is both created and exacerbated by mold. Mold comes about from, leaky pipes, moisture, and mold is all over the city, especially because we're a beach city, we have more moisture in our air. But you can go into homes and see walls covered in it, see water dripping, right? And to live in that type of moisture, kids especially are the most vulnerable, and they're living in a constant state of sickness and having lifelong asthma that's generated because of these poor living conditions. But then when you think about, right, so first we can see something like mold, but then you think about, well, what if you have no locks on your doors, right? I have a friend who had a broken door for a week and a half that wouldn't lock. There's physical safety implications with that. I've had friends with stairs that had fallen through, and so they couldn't climb up the stairs, or they had to take a very careful route. We've seen people who've had to walk across planks to get to their bathroom because the flooring just hadn't ever been put in. And so people are put into serious physical health dangers by the different conditions. But then something we often talk about is also the mental health implications, right, of living in a place that is where you can't sleep, right? There's no insulation, you're too cold. You become stressed out, you become a less productive worker or a poorer student in school. And so the implications, right, of our physical health then can go to our mental health, and then they affect the rest of our lives. We're going to finish this thought. We're going to take a quick break and come back and join Carrie Gallagher and Jennifer Weissman talking about the Rent Escrow Account Program.
Artful Thinking is a Long Beach-based nonprofit founded in 2010 to create artful events that educate the public about HIV and breast cancer while raising funds to support those services. Since then, we have brought Long Beach 2 successful comedy nights with Paula Poundstone and the monthly film series Out at the Movies, which featured appearances by Lily Tomlin as well as others. Beneficiaries include the Woman to Woman campaign in Long Beach, the Christina Applegate Foundation, St. Mary's Hospital's CARE program, the AIDS Assistance Foundation, the AIDS Food Store. Contact us at info@artfulthinking.org. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we can follow up. I have meetings today, and when I return to the office, we can schedule a time together. But right now, I'll just send out an email and make sure that everything's done. I need to call you back. Welcome back to PADNET Presents. I'm your host, Derek J. Simpson, Executive Director of the Long Beach Community Action Partnership. And we've been having a great, informative conversation with two guests about the Rent Escrow Account Program. And before we went to break, we were talking about all the dynamics and how it impacts both the landlord and the tenants. And Carrie, you were describing conditions that one might not typically think of in the city of Long Beach, but are very real in terms of substandard living conditions. But Jennifer, I wanted to ask you, because you've had experience outside of Long Beach in Los Angeles with a program such as this, and can you talk about what you've experienced there and how that might benefit us here in Long Beach as well?
Yes. So I can explain the difference that it's made in court for
Sure.
these tenants who have faced a retaliatory eviction. In Los Angeles, legal aid represented some clients who received a rent increase notice from the landlord shortly after their property exited the REAP program. And I was able to successfully represent these tenants based on the REAP protections so that they were able to stay in their home, and the landlord dismissed the case because raising the rent in retaliation is illegal. In contrast, here in Long Beach, I've represented numerous tenants who have had to leave their apartment rather than fight the eviction in court. And I'd like to preface the examples by explaining why it's so difficult to go to court to make that decision. Because if you lose, the eviction will stay on your credit report for 10 years, and that's subject to renewal. That makes it very difficult to rent any other apartment in the future. So a tenant who goes to trial and then loses is ensuring that they and their family will be homeless for many years. Landlords don't want to rent to someone with an eviction on their credit report, as you can imagine. And it also affects credit, which can make it difficult to purchase a home in the future as well. So here in Long Beach, I had a tenant who resided in an apartment that was filled with mold, and her daughter was very affected. Her daughter had asthma. She complained to the landlord. The landlord refused to make the repairs. So then she complained to code enforcement because her daughter was sick. So she wanted to get these repairs made. Code enforcement came out, assessed the property, sent the landlord a notice ordering the repairs. The day after the landlord got that notice from code enforcement, he served my client with a notice to leave, to an eviction notice. Client came to my office, we discussed her options, and she decided that she would rather move than try to fight the eviction in court based on the lack of protections for tenants. I had another set of clients who all resided at the same property. They lived in unimaginable conditions. For 3 weeks, they lacked functioning toilets, so they were defecating in buckets and removing the waste manually in biomedical bags and however they could. One tenant, when he was explaining these conditions to me, trying to explain why he stayed there, said, quote, "We humbled ourselves because at least we had a roof over our heads," end quote. And again, they were outstanding tenants. They always paid their rent on time, but after they complained to code enforcement, and code enforcement came out, inspected, and sent the landlord a notice to repair, they were also served with notices that they would have to leave.
Now, I have to interrupt and ask. I mean, that's just, I'm sitting here, my mouth drops. It's like, really? In Long Beach, something like that could happen? But, so it's very real.
Yes.
But, and I could see on the other hand, I mean, I would imagine someone who is in low income, they dare not take that risk of 10 years. I mean, that's a long time.
Subject to renewal.
Right. I mean, even bankruptcy isn't subject to renewal, as I understand it. So, I mean, you're talking about a big risk.
Yes.
So I'm thinking that makes your job that much more important. And you're the only attorney, as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, in Long Beach that addresses these cases. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Wow. So what's your caseload like? It's got to be, do we get on your schedule next year?
It's very large, yes. And any tenants that are watching, if you are having any issues, please come on down to Legal Aid. And I also run a trial prep clinic every Friday from 1 to 5, subject to appointment. So tenants can call the office and schedule an appointment.
But the bucket scenario, I mean, I mean,
know.
come on. I mean, it seems like you could I mean, did that go to court? I mean, I would think that landlord didn't have a leg to stand on, right?
You would think, but the problem is state law protections say that the retaliatory motive has to be dominant. And in that particular case, the landlord had evidence, and very good evidence, that he wanted to sell the property. And he claimed that was his dominant intent.
Wow.
And the tenants, didn't want, weighing the risk and the benefit, didn't want to go forward.
And Carrie, I would imagine this isn't new to you. You hear stories like this, and this isn't.
Absolutely, and we worked with these tenants from on the organizing side. They're actually, even though they still had to leave their unit, they're now speaking out. They've gone to city council to talk about their story. They've spoken to the media. They are saying this isn't fair, and we don't want anybody else to have to go through what we did. And so, in this same household, I mentioned planks, right? There was no floorboards and broken pipes with raw sewage coming out. And one man had to walk his neighbor across the plank, so he'd have to walk through the raw sewage, right? Defecating in buckets. These are things that in the United States in 2015 are absolutely unacceptable, but they're still happening. And so we really see our city as a partner in helping really make a more robust program that's going to keep these folks accountable, because these slumlords are hurting our entire community, not just these residents. We all suffer when our neighbors are living in unhealthy and unsafe conditions. So
yeah, let's stay on that and talk more about the bigger solution, because you're taking it case by case. That's the reactive mode. But if we become proactive, and I'll ask this of you, Carrie, because you're on the front lines as well, what can we do proactively? It sounds like then establishing this ordinance in our community is important, such as these other cities have. That's one way. What else can we do to address this issue?
Well, I think that one thing that, and it will also help us pass the ordinance, right, is just really helping people to start speaking out about the conditions that they're living in. And that's hard because, as you referenced earlier, there's a lot of fear, right? There's a lot of fear of reporting. There's a fear of going to court because of the eviction. Folks are living in fear. And we're not a safe community when people are too afraid to talk about what's going on. And so our biggest effort right now as an organization is just really walking people through that process of knowing, one, they're not alone, because it can be very shameful to admit that you're living in a condition that is considered substandard. That can be very shameful for people. And so one is letting them know you're not alone and it's not your fault. But we're not going to see changes unless we start speaking out about this. And so we've been going with renters to city council meetings every single week and creating a space for them to share their stories with their city leaders. And we've seen a number of our elected officials, our city council members, really step forward and say, this is unacceptable. Right? Some of them even went into homes to meet with residents, and they felt and saw and smelled the mold, saw the conditions, and they're ready to stand with us and fight with us. And so now it's really about building that bigger movement that says, as a city, we stand with renters, we stand with renters who are living in poor conditions, and we want to make sure that they have a healthy place to live.
Now, is this something that the citizens of Long Beach, regardless of what their socioeconomic status is, can look forward to things starting to come up on council agenda in 2015? Is that the goal?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. We have a number of events that are scheduled throughout the first of the year and through the spring. And I would invite people to go find us on Facebook, Housing Long Beach, where we're often posting about events, as well as our website, housinglongbeach.org. And we are really just inviting folks to join the movement, because it's a movement, When we think about Long Beach, 60% of residents are renters, so that's about 270,000 people. But there's a lot of homeowners that also say, I stand for renters' rights. There's property owners that say, I support REIT because this is unacceptable, and these slumlords are just hurting us all. So we would invite businesses, neighborhood associations to learn more about the work and get involved.
Now, from a legal aid perspective, when you do get a chance to sleep, because I would imagine with this caseload, it's got to be daunting. Yes. We've talked about it from a tenant perspective, but would you really say that the REAP is fair to the landlord as well?
Oh, absolutely. In part because of the due process protections that are in place before a property ever is put into the REAP program. And then also, everything about the REAP program is completely legal. It's in accord with state law. So under state law, a tenant can already withhold 100% of the rent if the landlord isn't making any repairs. When a property is put into the REAP program, the rent is only reduced up to 50%. So the landlord is still getting 50% more than he or she would otherwise be entitled to under state law. So everything about the REAP program is very fair to a landlord, and it really just gives tenants and the city the tools to make sure that repairs are getting made so that people in Long Beach aren't living in substandard living conditions.
And I think I read where one of the other possible economic benefits to this is that community contractors are often engaged in the repair process. Carrie, is that correct? Is that
Yeah,
the way
so
it
one of
works?
the things that LA did about 15 years ago, so they've had REAP for 30 years, 15 years ago, they realized not enough people know about the program and they don't know how to navigate it. So they incorporated community contractors where they hire folks from community organizations. So they're not just city workers, and they're going out and letting tenants and landlords know about the program, about their rights. And after they incorporated that, the number of units within REAP doubled because people started using it more. Right. And so I think that's a critical component that we need to include here in Long Beach, is making sure that there's a really strong community outreach effort, because there are thousands of residents, right, that are living in these conditions that they don't even know there is a code enforcement program at all, let alone REAP, if and when we do get it implemented in Long Beach.
So we have 1 minute exactly. What are the takeaways? If you had that one or two things that you just want people to really know as they reflect on what they've heard in all of this, whether it be a website or a class, start with you, Jennifer, real quickly. What would you say that you really want people to take away from this program?
What I would want people to take away is that a REAP program here in Long Beach would just help tenants and the city implement what is already allowed under state law and what tenants have the right to under state law. That's what I would really hope people would take away.
15 seconds. Carrie, what would you say?
I just think that, this is a community issue for all of us. We are all impacted when our neighbors are living in poor conditions. And so even if folks watching think, oh, but my house is fine, I still invite them to really learn more and join this and stand with their neighbors.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The Rent Escrow Account Program, very articulately explained by two professionals in our community, looking out for both sides. Thank you for joining us again on PADNET Presents.